kids do well if they can. And so with these lagging skills, what he talks about is we take for granted that we're going to teach academic skills, right? That's why we go to school. But for most of us, and especially those of us that are type A, very organized, goal-oriented, it would never occur to us that we need to teach study skills, organization, self-regulation, and so forth. And so he says that we completely change the game when we change our mindset and look at this as an opportunity to help the child with those lagging skills. So with working memory, I just want to kind of set the stage with the mindset. This is listed on a resource list that you have, and this is amazing because parents, and maybe even teachers, depending on the level that you teach, may or may not have gotten a lot of information on what's developmentally appropriate. I find that's another thing. Parents come to me in family sessions and there's not the understanding for what's age appropriate. And so there's a complete checklist for what a child should be doing at what age that requires executive functioning. And then I found this very interesting. There's a parent questionnaire in here so that we are aware of any struggles, any deficits, any strengths that we may or may not have where executive functioning occurs. And then in each of these areas that we've talked about, there are checklists, there are forms, reminder sheets, all kinds of amazing tools, I think, for helping to teach these areas that are considered lagging. So we start with working memory, and it talks about having your child teach you something. And so have them, whatever their favorite thing is, if it's cars, if it's Legos, whatever it is, can you show me how to do that? Can you explain how to do that? And that's reinforcing working memory. Working on visualization skills, have the child create a visual picture, play card games. Now what's so cool, because I'm a mature adult, Go Fish. How many of y'all remember playing Go Fish? Okay, and Old Maid. Who knew dominoes, checkers, chess? Who knew that those were amazing, amazing learning opportunities that reinforced this kind of thing with executive functioning. Excuse me.
While you take a drink of water, I'm jumping in.
Oh,
I'm that
yeah.
person that can tell you at meetings that I'll sit back and process it, and I think, well, yeah, I want to throw something else in. But something that, as we started using these strategies that I meant to mention as I introduced it, you know, because especially if the child is identified as having a deficit, that is indicative of neurological impairment, which ideally, with targeted and significant intervention and remediation, the child will recover some of those skills. However, due to the impairment, that is a significant challenge. And so think of these strategies and techniques like a toolbox. You know, none of us, if we had the choice to use an umbrella to walk out in a rainstorm, we'd carry the umbrella with us, right? And so the child always needs the techniques, the tools to take with them, right, all the way through. If you're identified as having a deficit, and notice I'm using deficit, not necessarily weakness, deficit, executive function, at an early age, you know, when I'm 5, all the way up to when I'm 18, whatever strategy I use for time management, whether that's the timer or whatever strategy I use for working memory, I need to have that toolbox, that umbrella, that toolkit all the way through with me. And that kind of helps, I think that helps us be gracious and understanding of the child, adult, individual in realizing, you know, this is no different than an umbrella or a pair of glasses that I take with me. So,
Okay. And then for flexible thinking, how many of you have heard the program, and I can't think of the owners or brand, but it's growth mindset and fixed mindset. Okay, there's a lot of elementary schools that are using that. And so when I talk to my clients that are familiar with that, with the fixed mindset, they get stuck in their thoughts, okay? And we need to get them to the place where they can open up to lots of different options and alternatives. And so with this flexible thinking, it talks about play, what's this? Show your child an ordinary object and see how many things they can make with it or use with their imagination. I like to use pipe cleaners, okay, and I like to use Play-Doh. And several years ago, I was working at a high school, and the principal brought in a very, very angry young man. And the principal, I'd never seen quite that angry before. And so I could tell that talking wasn't going to happen. So I handed him a pipe cleaner, and I just went about my work, and I looked over, and he had just crunched it down until it was an absolute wad, okay? And then I waited about another 15, 20 minutes because I'm leaving him alone. I'm giving him an opportunity to get from the instinctual brain, the reptilian survival brain, fight or flight, to get to the place where he can make some decisions. And so I hand him another pipe cleaner, and he just makes this amazing thing, okay? And so what happens there, and now, have you heard of mindfulness? That's a new counseling theory and technique. It's about being in the present and being able to focus, getting grounded and centered in what's happening now. Well, a lot of these kiddos, they're at a hyper alert state, and so to get their bodies to calm down, they need to do something with their hands. And so you might even, in your calming corner or whatever, just have them to show, what do you look like? Show me what you're feeling like. Create something. Well, I'm all wound up, okay? And so then we talk about what happened, ways to cool down, and so forth. And it gives them something to do with their hands. And it gives them an opportunity to get from here to here where they can think and actually make some decisions. Make up new rules for a game. And I have several clients that they absolutely love that. And they keep me on my toes. But if you encourage the child to do that, just like you read a story to them, The Three Pigs or The Little Red Riding Hood, have them retell the story in their own words. And then after they've learned to do that successfully, have them to recreate a new ending, okay? And all of this is reinforcing those executive functioning skills. Teaching self-taught, did you want to talk about that a little bit with the schools?
Oh, yes, and this is a strategy that may be familiar to some of you with students with autism, because, well, again, I was going to go on a whole side trip there, but I'll stay the course. And so, for certain reasons, obviously disruption in transition and activities, like what we're talking about with executive function weakness, is a challenge for an individual with autism. And so let's take, for example, I am Bethany, and I walk into the lunchroom for that day, and I had a designated seat, and Tim sat in my seat today, and, like the world has come to a crash, literally, and I don't say that in light, right? From the perspective of that individual child, the day has been seared in that moment. That is shattering, right? And so there are something that are called self-talk schools. And for those of you that have been in some of my courses, we do work through task analysis, but it's where, separate from the incident of crisis. So when nobody's emotions are elevated, you, the adult, staff person, or the child, you analyze, okay, what happens in Bethany's mind when she comes into the lunchroom? And again, don't take for granted any little step that you think in your mind. Like Bethany looks and she sees who's there. And so then what you're wanting to work through for the self-talk to equip the student is, okay, what is going to be the personal script that we begin to rehearse with Bethany so that when Tim is in her seat, she knows what to do. And so it may look something like, okay, I see that Tim is in my seat. And so then the first thing I do is take a step back and do my deep breathing strategy. Then I scan the room for Mrs. Martin because she's the paraprofessional that works with me. And then we're gonna cross our fingers that Mrs. Martin doesn't have a substitute because then all the wheels fall off that day. But you can scan the room for Mrs. Martin, and then, Mrs. Martin's supporting. So you see where I'm going. It's the specific script, and then you pre-rehearse that with the child or the student. And the same thing for children at home that have difficulty with executive function and stimulus control and impulse control and self-regulation. Like, mom is my primary caretaker taking me to and from soccer, but mom has a meeting, or mom's going to have a dinner with family tonight, and so I'm her friends, and so dad's going to be taking me to soccer tonight. So here's the script. And honestly, the child may need that script actually written out, and then you've rehearsed it again, aside from the crisis situation, 5 or 6 times, and then they may need to carry the script in their pocket. It may need to be visually laid out so that they pull it out and have that as a guide. But and that's, I think that would go when I talk about outside the crisis event. For any of these strategies, they're things that if all possible, you want to build in, and I know that's right, so we can go on information overload and that can feel overwhelming in a tall order, but you want to build into their regular routine so that they're practicing and rehearsing these things when our emotions are at a typical standard level. And the other side piece I would say to that in terms of practicing and rehearsing, just like when you identify academic goals and you identify behavior goals, if we have 10 goals, the probability, number one, of the staff and adult implementing that with fidelity and accountability, right, is real low. And then number two, especially with the younger child, talking about age-appropriate expectations, the probability of the child being able to attain that many goals is also a very tall order. So if you leave here this evening and you think, okay, I'm going to try one of these strategies, just identify 1 or 2 and say, okay, these are 1 or 2 that I think are really relevant and appropriate for my child or my student, and let's see if we can't be successful with one of those and then move forward from there. So we get to breathing. Do we want to move forward? Is that okay?
No, with organization.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm ready to go to organization.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, with organization, they talk about using a classroom calendar, a student calendar. They talk about checklists. And one thing I love about this book, none of us have time for hardly anything, but there are all kinds of little, just like all those things that she told you that a child requires executive functioning skills. There were about 12 things in their daily routine. Well, here's morning routine and getting ready for school routine and bedtime routine. There's one in here for learning new tasks. And then there's also a place for some self-monitoring. Yes, where the child can say, okay, these are the things. You get the child to assess and evaluate, because after all, our goal is self-discipline. We want them to lead the way in their own emotional regulation, self-regulation, their own organization, and all of these skills. And so these are the things I can do without thinking, situations where I have trouble thinking, and then what I'm going to do in order to stay controlled when I get in those situations. And for little ones, they can draw this. They can take a pipe cleaner, they can take Play-Doh, they can do this with Legos, and help you it helps them to be more responsible for their own organization, their own development of the executive skills.
And I'd say my greatest experience is with the high school age, and just like we've talked about transition planning and incorporating the high school student with an IEP planning meeting, for these techniques and strategies, that is so important, because this is true with younger children, but significantly with a teenaged individual, right? Like, we could put all these things in place, but if they don't determine what they are willing to do, and if they don't have ownership in that, then all of our work was for naught, right?
And then that helped me think that Ross Green with the lagging skills, he talks about approaching parenting and discipline as collaboration. And so there's more work up front, but it's helping the child to talk with you and assessing what's going on. And like the homework's not getting turned in. Well, where's the breakdown? Is it not happening at home? Is it not getting in the backpack? Are they not turning it in? Whatever. And then involving the child. He talks about, as parents and as teachers, we have a preconceived solution to the issue. Well, if the child hasn't bought in, and you know the oppositional kids, you know the kids that are strong-willed, if they don't buy in, at some point, we lose. And so he talks about collaborating with the child in a mutually respectful sort of way so that there is mutual problem solving. And so we want to enter the conversation with our own ideas for how to solve it. With Love and Logic, they call that letting the child do the thinking, letting the child do the problem solving. Anytime we work harder at problem solving or any of these kinds of activities than the child does, we're doing it for them and we're not getting them to that place of independence. So moving along, sorting, organizing, using color coding, and it's mentioned somewhere else in here, but the importance of timer. And so I found this, it's called Motive Aider, and I found this on an autism website, and I use it in my counseling sessions because if I'm not careful, I get to talking and listening and get involved, and the session goes over. And so for children, a lot of times they are distracted. There's issues with focus and attention, and so the timer, and you can set it for several you're supposed to be working on,
How was that spelled?
and so forth. Well, I don't mind passing it around. Where,
I just,
yeah. But I found it really, really helpful. Yeah, self-monitoring. And so again, checklist, like the ones in this book, there are a checklist. I love this. Self-regulation, interventions and strategies, and there's a whole chapter on executive functioning. And lots of strategies, lots of ways to work with the child to achieve mutual goals. The visual cues, again, self-evaluation, and I love this. Teach the child, maybe have them create their own checklist, their own monitoring form, and then make it simple enough. And Pinterest, we love Pinterest. There are all kinds of cool ways to even use picky sheets with magnets so that it becomes real, real simple and the child moves it over for themselves, again, teaching them more buy-in. So that's the end of that.
Right,
And
but
so now,
we want to jump back to emotional impulse. with
oh, did we skip one?
Breathing fun? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. How did that? We're jumped way over. Hey, sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, we missed impulse control.
Yeah, right, both of them, but because we're gonna
Run out of
do this
time.
enough time. Yeah, sorry, I stole some of the fun time by
Yeah.
talking so much about the,
Well, the
What is
timer
it
came
say?
under task initiation. That was
Right.
under there. And then breaking down into little mini steps. And with some of these kiddos, they cannot handle a list of 4 or 5 things to do. You've got maybe 2, and then you stretch it to 3, and you celebrate at every stage. Oh, and I love with impulse control, and y'all probably do this, a 5-minute warning, a 2-minute warning. And I do that in the therapy room and the playroom because they get so involved and have so much fun that it's very, very difficult for them to want to leave. Emotional control, that's where we're going to do some of the breathing. You have a handout that looks like this. And I've been using this with adult clients that have trouble with insomnia. And so, for some of them, it's okay to say, hey, these are for kiddos, but I would like for you to try them. And then for other parents, I tell them, this is probably something that would be helpful for your children. And so as a family, why don't you do a little bit of bedtime yoga? And you did not get a copy of the explanation, but I have some cards up here, and if you want me to email that to you, or Michelle can, we'll do that. But there's the little goose, and that's sitting on the floor. The little cat scratch, and that's sitting crisscross applesauce, and then you stretch your arms out. The little calf, and that's just as simple as putting your hands behind your back and stretching. And most of us, after we're 50, 55, we should be practicing a lot of stretching. What I love about some of these is you can do them in bed, okay? Or let's say I'm about to head to bed, and so where's the one facing a wall? So against the dresser, I'm just going to do a few little push-ups, real slow, and I'm going to breathe. Little bird stretch. Think about your day, breathe in through your nose, add wings, and then breathe out. And then, of course, there's some actual yoga type poses that can be done, like the downward dog. You have a handout that says stretch your child's brain, and it talks about Legos. And there are counselors now that are doing therapy with Legos. And if you have a student that's very anxious, or I find a lot of students with autism or that are on the spectrum, they love Legos. Parents will try to use those as punishment and reward. Please don't take away the one thing that they connect with, okay? Find something else. But with your children, you can have them take the Play-Doh and, okay, show me how nervous you are when you're in this situation. And so they make a ball. And then show me how nervous you are in this situation and in this situation. How afraid are you? I have a lot of clients that are coming just because they can't go upstairs or to their own bathroom or their own bedroom at night. So show me how afraid you are of the dark, okay? When we come to anger, it's like, show me how much anger you had today when the security, the SRO officer came in and hauled you out. I have one client that I'm working with on that. And so then when you were able to calm down a little bit, show me what the anger looked like. You can let them pound it, and they love that. Again, the board games, and I love this consequences game. It's for 3-year-olds and up, and they're smiley faces and sad faces. And then they make choices, and they tell you whether there was a negative or a positive consequence with that choice or action. Very simple sort of thing for them to do. And then, of course, outings, video games. I love this one. And these are all games: Blurt, Scrabble, Pictionary, Freeze, Jenga. Now, I bought the therapy version of Jenga, and so in the classroom, I would encourage you to do that. It has questions that help with decision-making, self-esteem. There's a set of cards for students that are working through their parents' divorce. All of that, really, really cool. Okay, let's practice some breathing, because we are close.
Conclusion.
Okay. There's some new research, and it's called 4-7-8. Okay? And so you inhale 4, you hold 7, and you exhale 8. Okay? So each one of these, and little boys and little girls like for it to be active. So I'm going to give a little boy maybe the pinwheel, but I'm going to give the little girls, then it's their fairy wand, or it's their princess wand. And so we practice this lazy 8 breathing. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Okay, and they're getting rid of some of that energy. And then there's star breathing. I also have students, it's called the Big Emotions, 5 Big Emotions. I think you could probably Google it and find it. So everybody hold your hand up. Okay, and you trace your hand with your other hand. So this is a mindfulness activity. It's grounding, okay? If I get stressed, anxious, whatever, this is for you guys as well as your students. The fact that I've touched my body, okay, I'm back in this room. Now I inhale up, exhale down. Inhale up, exhale down. And I tell students, if you're in class, yeah, you're not going to do this whole thing, but you can trace your hand, okay? I love this book, Sonny Shifts His Brain. So it talks about the parts of the brain. This author also has one on child abuse and getting stuck, getting anxious, getting angry. And it talks about getting the child from the brain stem to the thinking part of the brain. So let's all do this. It's called a crisscross, okay? And then we're going to inhale 4, hold 7, exhale 8. Now y'all probably did that with your dominant arm. Okay, now I want you to do it with your non-dominant. Okay? And that feels weird. Well, that's doing more, and this is getting oxygen. This is giving your survival brain, your instinct brain time to calm down and get you to a place where you can make a decision. Because you know what we do with kids, they get flustered, they get upset. There's no time for problem solving and having a conversation at that point. We've got to let them get back to this place.
And the truth is, right, as adults, when we're angry in the moment, like the last thing you're thinking of, let's relax and do a breathing activity. But the reality is, I've shared this story briefly with WTAMU Workshop. The school that my 4-year-old attends teaches these techniques. And so I'll just real fast telling myself, right, it's been a long work day, I'm not a night person, and so it is like, just get your pajamas on, I'm done, right? And he's all, Mom, you need to practice your deep breath. And so you know what, I stopped and did it, and he was right. Like once I did take the moment to take the deep breath and calm down, it at least gave me 3 more minutes of patience to get the clothes on, you know.
There's another technique in mindfulness that has to do with grounding and centering. And this is for individuals with anxiety, and some of you at moments feel anxious before job interviews or before an art meeting or whatever. They encourage you to just count the circles in the room. Count everything that's blue. Count everything that's green. And so if you see your child even shopping beginning to kind of ramp up and escalate, have them to stop, because what it does is it gets us back in the present, okay? And then once we do that, for people that have serious anxiety, we have the opportunity to recognize, hey, we're really safe, everything's okay. I found this book in the early 1990s, okay? And I went to a PE workshop that was teaching. They were teaching academic teachers how to incorporate movement in the classroom to help with academic skills. And so the most important one in here, and I put this on your resource list, it's called a hookup. Now, I can't call it a hookup anymore because, you know, the teenagers think something else, but I want you to hold your hands out in front of you. I call it a hand grasp. Now, slide them over, okay, and pull that up. And then supposedly your feet are supposed to be crossed. And in the book, it tells you all the neuroscience for it and what it activates. And then it says breathe, where you're supposed to put the tongue on the roof of your mouth. And then when you're inhaling for the 4 and you're holding, the tongue stays there. And then when you're exhaling, you relax your tongue. Now the 4-7-8 breathing, that researcher also suggests putting the tongue on the tip of your mouth. If you learn a new skill, if you're in classes, if you'll take a minute just to put your tongue on the roof of your mouth and to do some breathing, that's supposed to help with information retention. Sometimes I'm in a crowd and have a little bit of social anxiety, and so I just do this. And no one knows what I'm doing, but it's a calming exercise. One other thing I wanted to mention, a lot of schools are using this. It's called Zones of Regulation, and they sell posters, but it's like, are you in the green area? Are you in the blue? Are you in yellow? And so forth. And so there again, it asks the child to draw or to write what's happening that put them in the red area and how they can get to the green area. Just awesome, awesome stuff. And what I failed to mention, this explosive child and raising human beings, now there's a Lost at School book. And if I were sending teachers out into the school district as an educator from the university, I would require this. Because ideally, you're going to have the school working with you as the parent, and the teacher to this team. We're done. Okay. Let the kids make calming jars. I bought these Voss water bottles at Amazon, and I let them make it during a session. This is something you could even do in a classroom. We're making lots of slime. I discovered that some kids, they need to work the old-fashioned stuff that we used to do, crocheting, embroidery, kneading bread, all that is good, good stuff. And so when you're at the dollar store and it's 50 cents a bottle, buy lots of glue because it takes a whole bottle to make one recipe of slime. But the kiddos will love you for it. Okay.
As y'all can see, we enjoy the science of this. We love students and are passionate about helping them, and so we could continue talking for hours, quite honestly, because we're excited about it. But we thank you for listening to us tonight. If you have questions or requests for resources, don't hesitate to catch us after. We're happy to visit with you this evening, or we can give you business cards so that you can send emails and gather information later.
And one more book. There is a new storybook series that's being done for executive functioning that is really, really awesome. And then, of course, this one's on anxiety and helping kids to work through that. Okay.
All right, well, I want to thank everybody for coming. Just a couple of announcements. If you haven't friended us on Facebook, I would encourage you to do that. It's West Texas, I think it's West Texas A&M Learning Disabilities, I think is what it is. But if you pull up West Texas A&M, it should come up. Don't forget your evaluations, if you please complete those. Also, okay, so this is like hot off the presses. We haven't even signed the contract yet, but this is for your ears only. But I want you to put October the 9th on your calendar because Henry Winkler is coming to Amarillo. So he has done a series of books for kids called Hank Zipser. He will be doing book signings, and we will be encouraging families to come. So put that on your calendar, October the 9th, and I don't know where yet, but we'll get all those details figured out, but please save that day. Any have to go. Yeah. Yeah. Fawns. No, these young kids don't know. All right, Dr. Good, do you have anything to tell us tonight?
We worked on telling your own story tonight. We have a couple autobiographies going, at least one poem, and 2 self-portrait pictures.
Awesome.
One of them is down here busy with a pad or something. But we also ran off a little energy outside. So you can
Good.
go.
All right, thank you. Next month is our panel of Living Successfully with Learning Disabilities. So it's one of our fan favorites, so be sure to come next month.
And bring your kids for that one too, so they can see people that have lived with learning disabilities and now really successful.
All right, thank you. Good night.